Hello again, church. Today we're reading Job 3-4, and we're just going to jump right in. So before we get into these two chapters, I want to point out something that might be helpful in interpreting Job as you read through the book, specifically from chapters 3 to 31, when we see this back and forth conversation from Job and his friends. So what we need to keep in mind are 2 points that might help. They're pretty general, and but just think about these as you read through this. Number one, Job is justifying himself most of the time. He often is talking about why he doesn't deserve the suffering that he has. And while that is true to a degree because of God's declaration that he is righteous, he fails to recognize God's sovereignty and wisdom at work in his life to reveal something that he does not necessarily know. So that's one thing to understand about all of Job's complaining, if you will. Keep that in mind. The second thing is that Job's three friends that we're going to get introduced to, they would hold to what I will generally call the prosperity gospel. So they make actually throughout their speeches, if you will, many correct statements about God and actually God's desires for us, even in terms of that God desires blessing for us, he desires to reward us, those kinds of things. But their application is incorrect because they assume that because Job is suffering, that he must have done something wrong. And they actually, in a harder way to say it, they are actually making a blasphemous accusation about God because they are actually saying that God is the author of Job's suffering. But chapters 1 made it very clear that it is in fact Satan who is in charge of Job's suffering. So their accusation based on their belief that good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, is actually blasphemous because of who they attribute Job's suffering to. So just keep those 2 points in mind as you read through the book. All right, jumping in, just some general comments about chapters 3 and 4 here today. In chapter 3, verses 1 to 10, we see Job's response after he has worshipped. In chapter 1, verse 21, and chapter 2, verse 10, after he has worshipped, he is now in a place of complete despair. He is despairing about what his life has become. And to a degree, imagine yourself like Job. There's no insurance companies back then, right? Like what he has lost is lost. And he has no way of knowing how he might be able to recoup all that he has lost. And he is suffering physically as well. So it is not like abnormal for Job to be in a place where he is really suffering and really struggling to understand what's going on here. And he needed a revelation from God. And that's an important point to keep in mind. What Job needed most was not actually an answer or a reason. What he needed was a revelation. And he's going to get that at the end of the book, and that's going to be good to go through that. But he also needed some friends that in his hour of suffering and need would actually point him to Jesus. And like we talked about yesterday, if there are times when you see friends that you need to encourage, that you need to somehow help in some way, try to find ways to say things that are going to help your friends or family members who suffer to see Jesus and to seek Jesus in all of what they're doing. All right, so the next part of chapter 3, verses 13 to 19 is an encouraging part. Job just simply recognizes that the afterlife is going to hold the rest that he is desiring and needing. And I think those are just some encouraging verses, and so those are kind of neat. Then going into chapter 4, we see his friend Eliphaz making his first statements here. And so in verses 3 to 5, we see that Eliphaz recognizes Job for doing some really good things. He's talking about how he's instructed people and that his words have been supportive and all those kinds of things. But verses 6 and 7, are where we realize that Eliphaz's application is incorrect. Because now he starts talking about if you really were this righteous person, these bad things would not be happening to you. And this is where we get to see the misapplication of what his friends believe Job's situation to be and where his suffering is coming from. All right, so then if you skip ahead to verses 17 to 21, we see an interesting thing. Eliphaz has had a dream that he claims he's had, and he recounts what this spirit told him in this dream. And what I want us to notice is when God speaks to us, he will, if there is something that needs correction, he will speak it in a way that's affirming conviction, okay? He will not speak in a condemnational way. And that's actually the tone that we see here. And so I would actually venture to say that who Eliphaz actually heard from may not have been the Lord. It might have been, but he might have misinterpreted what the Lord said. But likely he actually did not hear from a spirit from God because of the condemnational tone with which he heard these things. So I hope that helps you see some things in the passages today, and blessings as you continue to seek the Lord in your day today.